Hi everyone, this is James from F9 Audio and the Freemasons, and welcome to the first of the Ableton Live Tips videos. I've been using Live since version 4, and over the years I've seen it transform into one of the most important audio applications ever developed. Live is changing the way music is made, and these are 10 of my favourite tricks that I've learned along the way. Number 1, the chop. This is one of my favourite techniques and it's something I'm reaching for every time I use Ableton. That was the track that we're going to be using, and so far really it's just some beats and a bass line. Now I want to throw some chordal information into the mix. Here I've got some pre-bounced chords that are sympathetic to the track, and the chords are just held and sustained and ring through. So let's start to chop. First of all, select the part on the Arrange page, and now let's look at the region parameters and waveform display. We're going to turn on the warp functions. It honestly doesn't matter which algorithm you're using, this is just so we can set some warp markers that will become the slice points. These faint grey lines show us where Ableton thinks the transient marks are. I'm going to agree with every single one of them and place a warp marker at the beginning of each of these chords. So now let's actually complete the chop. Come back up to the Arrange page, select the region, right-click or control-click on it, and come down to this option, Slice to New MIDI Track. A new box will appear and you'll have a variety of options. What we want is for Ableton to slice the audio at the warp markers that we've just positioned in. So we're going to use this top option, Warp Marker. There are a variety of presets for slicing. We're just going to use this default built in. So there we go. Ableton has now created a drum rack with one box in the drum rack taken up for each of the slice points. If you want to see what's going on, click on this icon here. The drum rack will open up and you'll see that Ableton is using an instance of Simpler for each one of the chops. I've got another application open here so you can see what's coming in from my MIDI keyboard. And here you can see that by hitting just one note, I can play back one of the chopped chords. Let me show you now how much fun this system is to use. My playing needs a little bit of quantize there, so I'll just sort that and apply an MPC groove. There's 1,000,001 uses for that, but you may have heard it on repeated 8th division chord chops. Now, as these chops are actually held inside of simplers, you can always change the start position of any of the chops and get a slightly different sound. So now let's have some fun with this part. Let's throw on an auto filter. I've got another set of chords here, and I'm going to set these up in exactly the same way. These are for a different part of the track, and I've chopped them in exactly the same method that I showed you earlier. I've taken some liberties with the video editing just to save us some time. And what I've effectively done here is re-sampled a bass sound. It's a composite of about 3 synths and some tasty effects, and it's a great way of also saving resources. And here it is now, slightly more bedded into the track with some reverb, distortion and sidechaining. Now let's use this on something live. I'm not a guitar player, but I love to pick the instrument up and see if I can find some notes that are going to work with the track. Here's a small section I recorded earlier. My timing's never brilliant on a guitar, so let's use the chop to get this into our production properly. I've already set some warp markers to save us time, so now I'm going to right-click or control-click on the region and select Slice to New MIDI Track. I'm going to move the original audio file up to the top of the arrange page out of the way, and now let's hear our chops back on the MIDI keyboard. So let's play some of those guitar parts in across a section of our track. It's obviously going to take some quantizing to get it absolutely spot on, so I'll just deal with that now. And add a little bit of reverb and delay just to bed it in. You can use this method to chop absolutely anything, including full tracks. And once you get the hang of it, I guarantee you'll be using it daily. Number 2, a group track. Now, the traditional way of grouping in Ableton is to grab a series of tracks here, like for example, I'm just going to hold shift and select these 5 on the right, then control click or right click on any of the track names and come down to this option, group tracks. When I do this, you'll see that the display changes and this almost arm comes out from the group track, covering those tracks that we had selected a minute ago. These tracks are now in a group, and using this triangle icon, I can fold them up to keep them tidy on the arrange page. The best thing is, I can now apply processes to the entire group, as now all of the outputs of the tracks are funneled through this one group channel. Here's an example using the high-pass filter of an EQ. As useful as this is, it does have a couple of drawbacks. For example, I can't turn all of this information into one audio file quickly. I would normally do this using the freeze command. So let me show you a very useful alternate method. I'm going to create a brand new track on the arrange page, and I'm going to rename it Group Track. This is the track's input selector, and to avoid confusion, I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom option, No Input. This ensures that nothing comes into this track from the audio interface. If you don't see any of these controls on your arrange page, toggle Ableton's routing view switch here. Now I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select these 5 tracks. And on any one of them whilst they're selected, I'm going to come down to this output selector box and send the output of these tracks to our new group track. So just to recap, instead of going to the master fader, all of the outputs of these tracks that we just had selected are now being sent to this group track. Although initially when you play back, you won't hear them. So now to complete the process, come to our group track, and where you have the different monitoring options for the track, select Input Only. And now we can apply all the same kind of processing that we would normally do to a group in Ableton. So let's now apply a sidechain to our new group track. I'm going to pop in a compressor, open up the sidechain panel, select the kick and start sidechaining. So you may be asking, why do this? It seems an awfully long process when it's so easy to set up a group. Well, for me, the biggest benefits of doing it this way is that at any point, you can hit record arm on the track and create a brand new audio file straight on the arrange page of all of your chosen bits. Once you've made the recording though, don't forget to swap the monitoring function of the track back to automatic. Number 3, Warp Madness. This is where we take Ableton's Beats time stretch mode and push it to an extreme. Here's one of our newly bounced musical sections. So to set this effect up, come down to the Warp menu. Make sure warping is on and make sure you are in Beats mode. This drop-down menu selects certain time divisions that are preserved within the time stretch algorithm. And playing with this setting is the trick to getting this effect right. Leave the transient repeat on this middle mode so you get a degree of stuttering. And this is the magic button. It's the tempo multiplication button. Each time you press it, it makes Ableton think the tempo of the audio file is actually twice the tempo of the setting it was before you pressed it. It's only there because sometimes Ableton's auto tempo detect will get it wrong and, for example, think that a 140 BPM is actually at 70 BPM. But we can use this to our advantage and push it into some extreme time stretching. Let's hit that again to make it even more extreme. And just by changing that one timing parameter, we can make a whole series of different rhythmical effects. Here's another page I prepared earlier in a different style. Each one of the green blocks above has a different timing characteristic, and prizes for anyone who can guess which track I've actually sampled here. This trick does take a bit of practice to get right, and I would always suggest bouncing down anything that you get sounding good immediately so that you don't tweak any further and lose it. Number 4, the power of the edit menu. Ableton has a fantastic selection of tools built into its edit menu, available here at the top, and these are an absolute godsend if you find yourself stuck with just 8 bars of music in front of you, wishing you could arrange quickly. The first is my absolute favourite, the duplicate command. The duplicate command has many functions. To access it, come up to the edit menu and come down here to where it says duplicate. To the right, you'll see the key command. On an Apple, it's Command D. On a PC, it's Control D, and it's definitely one worth learning. You can use it to duplicate almost anything. Here I can duplicate an entire track. And when you do duplicate a track, all the plugins on that track are duplicated with it. I can duplicate multiple tracks at once. And most importantly, it will duplicate entire regions that I've got selected on the arrange page. So for example, if I select all this and hit the duplicate command, look at what happens. Let's just undo that quickly. I can also duplicate plugins within a chain. And I can select and duplicate MIDI notes and send them to the cursor position. So let me show you just how fast you can build arrangements using the duplicate function. I'm going to get rid of the second half of this track for now. We're just going to concentrate on this first half. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Select all of our main section here and hit duplicate a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I can just take out some of the musical parts in places that I know will work and very quickly build an intro. And it really is this simple to start building an arrangement. Don't be scared to fill the track up. As soon as you get past that stage of it just being a loop, it'll instantly start to feel like a record. Now here's one of the best features of the duplicate function. You'll have noticed there that some of the MIDI chords were missing, but it's only in a section of that actual region. I can select any beat, bar or measure within any part of any region, whether it be audio or MIDI, hit duplicate, and a copy will be placed directly after the selected area. And in most circumstances, any automation that you've got applied to that selected region gets copied with it. Let me show you what I mean here. If you master the secrets of Ableton's edit menus, you'll soon be flying around your track arrangements. Number 5, the Ableton deck stop. This has been a really popular trick inside Logic Pro, but now we found a way to get this effect inside Ableton perfectly. I'm going to use this musical section to show you how it's done. It's this highlighted section that I actually want to create the deck stop sound over. Now I always advise making a fresh new region, so for that I'm going to use the split command. Select the part you want to split, come up to the edit menu, and there's the split command. If you like your key commands, it's Apple E on a Mac, Control E on a PC. Now let's look at the region parameters for the part we're going to apply the deck stop. Make sure warp is turned on. I'll just click through this. We're going to use envelope automation on the clip to create the deck stop sound. To toggle the envelope controls on, click this button here. Now for the most important thing. Make sure that the warp mode is set to Complex Pro and the formant control is all the way down to 0. Instead of using a volume envelope, we're going to be using a transposition envelope. So I'm going to select the transpose option here. The red line shows the transposition value over time, and currently it's all set to 0. So I'm going to place an automation node right here at the beginning of our file, and then I'm going to place another node at the end of the file and drop it down to quite a dramatic negative value. Now let's listen back and see what happens. I may have been a bit extreme there. Let's come back and set the final resting value to -24. And as always with any kind of automation in Ableton, it's possible to apply a curve. If I hold down Alt, that'll work on a PC and a Mac, and push against this straight line, you'll see I can turn it into a curve. Now, as we're using a transpose envelope here as opposed to a fade, we can also process in the other direction. Let's take a new section, zoom in, double click. There's our region. Select warp just for that one region. View the envelope controls, set it to transpose, and now I'll set some envelope automation points up. This time rising in pitch. But it won't sound right unless you remember to come down and change the time stretch mode to Complex Pro with the formant set at 0. Let's hear both effects in place. It needs some finesse, but I'm sure as you can gather, that's a great effect to play with. Number 6, the frequency shifter. You may not use this plugin much at the moment in Ableton, but it's great for doing some extreme processes and creating risers. Here's something I like to do a lot in Ableton. I'm going to take a very small section of some of the music loop. I know from quick investigation this bit will work perfectly, so I'm just going to use the split command and drag this onto another track. Now I'm going to use the duplicate command to copy it over a couple of bars. Now I want to create a brand new composite audio file of all of those sections, so here's just one little extra tip. To do that I'm going to use the freeze command. Right click or control click on the track name and select freeze track. When it's actually done that, right click or control click on the track name again and select flatten. If I extend the first region out, you can see that it's now an entire audio file. This is a great tip to know. So let's use this new audio file to create a riser. I'm going to bring it into the second half of our arrangement and duplicate it 4 times so it covers that entire section. So now let's apply the frequency shifter. I would always recommend playing around with the plugin's parameters just to hear what you can get out of it. So let's build our riser. I've just put a high pass filter before the frequency shifter to get rid of any sub information before it hits the process. Now we're going to put the frequency shifter in ring modulation mode and turn the mix control to 100% wet. By clicking once on the frequency control, I get to see the automation lane for that parameter on the arrange page. And now I'm just going to set 2 automation nodes, one low at the beginning of this section and one high right at the end. Let's have a listen. Just add a delay here. And let's listen to that in context. It's also excellent on rhythm elements. Let me show you what I mean with this crunchy loop. And I've got this in shift mode as opposed to ring modulation mode, and I'm just going to draw some automation nodes in so you can have a listen. It's great for breakdowns. This is one of Ableton's best extreme plugins. Now, for the most part, you're probably just going to be doing all of your work inside Ableton, but there may be times where you're collaborating with someone else and you want to get everything across into another program. And the best way to do that is to bounce out every single element within your track as a separate audio file. Within the industry, this is known as creating stems. When you create stems, you want all of the audio effects that you've currently got on your mix applied, so you're almost creating a snapshot of exactly where your track stands. Doing this in Ableton is incredibly easy. First of all, select the region that you want to actually bounce out. If you're doing the whole track, I always recommend having some padding either side. So you have a couple of bars spare in front of the first sound and 4 to 8 extra bars selected at the end of the arrangement. This makes sure that any reverb or delay decays will be included in the resulting audio files. To action the bounce, come up to Ableton's main file menu and select the Export Audio and Video option. This checkbox at the top tells Ableton what you want to bounce, and the second option is always individual tracks. This is how we're going to create our stems. Now for the rest of the options, I would always recommend turning normalize off because this will ruin the balances between the individual elements and gain them all up to digital maximum. I'm going to turn dither off as it's a bad idea to have it set across multiple tracks, and I'm going to select the bit depth to 24. Do not be fooled into thinking 32 is a better bit depth. Hardly any programs support it. To make sure your files can be read by as many programs as possible, always select WAV. Now when we start to execute this, a standard file window will come up. I always like to create a new folder for stems. I'll just quickly name it here. And in the Save As box, Ableton allows you to set a prefix for the resulting audio files. I'm just going to use F9 and an underscore. Always keep it short. Here's our resulting audio file list. As you can see, each one has a small file next to it with .asd at the end. These are Ableton's analysis files, and I always like to have that checkbox on, as it means should they come back into Ableton, they'll slot straight in very quickly. As well as all the individual files, Ableton will also produce a file from its master output. This is great when you're transporting the track around, as you can hear how your project last sounded in the Ableton session. Number 8, preferences. Now, preferences aren't an exciting topic in any application, but there are a couple in Ableton that can make enormous difference to your workflow. The first one I want to talk about here is this odd checkbox, permanent scrub area. So let me show you what it does. Open up any audio region in the sample editor by double-clicking it. Underneath the main waveform display is this small box, which is the clip overview. I can click, drag and hold on any part of the entire audio file and instantly see it in the display. This is perfect for setting the warp markers. But you'll also notice when I hover on any part of the waveform display, the cursor shows a playback icon. This is what Ableton means by permanent scrub. If I click on any part of that waveform, I can play back from there. Useful in some cases, but not all the time. So let's bring back our preference window and now turn off permanent scrub area. Now you'll see the cursor icon has changed to a magnifying glass, and I can perform all the zooming functions that I was in the clip overview directly in the waveform editor. For me, this is a much better way to work if you're doing a lot of waveform editing and placing warp markers. The next one is incredibly important for all users of Live. Come down to the Record, Warp and Launch tab, and this is the option that we're talking about, Create Fades on Clip Edges. Ableton out of the box has this option on. I urge anyone using Ableton today to turn this off. It applies hidden and very small crossfades at the front of any audio region on the Arrange page. It's designed to stop any clicking between different audio regions, but it has a very unwanted side effect. If, for example, you have individual drum sounds on your Arrange page, it will soften the transient information at the beginning of each sound, and it's not always obvious why that's happening. So my advice is turn it off and apply all fades manually. And whilst we're here, let's look at two more options. I always like to have 1 or 2 bar loops, in other words short samples, automatically looping and warping on the page. So I set this option to auto. On the other hand, I prefer to perform any warping of very long samples, for example entire tracks, manually, so I always make sure this option is turned off. Otherwise, Ableton can place a large number of warp markers across your audio region that are time consuming to remove manually. And here's a very important option at the top of this preference page. Always have your file type, in other words the file format that Ableton is recording and using within the program, set to WAV. WAV is the most interchangeable audio file format in the world. By using WAV, you can guarantee that any of the files that you're generating within your sessions are readable by 99.9% of audio programs. Number 9, simple delay. Now, when any plugin has the word simple at the front of it, it's only natural that we may pass it over. But sometimes some of the best tricks are the simplest. So let me show you how to use this plugin for some extreme stereo effects. Let's look at our claps. Now let's apply our simple delay. The default settings are for a standard stereo delay. But what many people don't realize is, if I turn off these sync buttons, I can actually manually dial in a different delay time on the left and right channels. Turn your mix control all the way to the right so it's 100% wet. Keep one channel at the lowest possible delay time and the other somewhere between 10 and 45 milliseconds. This is called the Haas effect, and as you can hear, the stereo image dramatically widens due to the time differences between the two stereo channels. Whilst amazing in stereo, it can have detrimental effects to the signal in mono, so it's always worth placing a quick utility plugin onto the channel and dropping the stereo width to 0 to check. Then you can tweak your delay times accordingly to bring the sound back into focus in mono. As this is an extreme stereo effect, I would always recommend having the very final stereo width set to somewhere between 80 and 95%. Now let's hear it in the track and check the width of the claps out as I toggle the bypass. Those of you listening on headphones would really notice that stereo width change. This is a great trick for things like effect stems. Let me show you. I'm going to select both of these effects in the clap track and then right-click or control-click on either of the plugins and select copy. Now I can paste these into the effects channel. I'll set Ableton to loop round this bar transition where there's a big effects section, and I'll just increase the delay time on this right-hand channel. That's having a huge difference on the stereo image. And once again, I'm just going to bring the overall stereo width just in a bit. It's always good practice. You don't want everything super wide in your track. This can sound great on most things, but always be careful when you're applying it to bass elements of your track. Here's our bass line with the effect applied. Although it sounds fantastic, there will be some issues. Now let's check it in mono. Some of the signal will actually disappear. Although most musical playback systems are now very much stereo, some USB speakers are actually mono, and believe it or not, some club systems are actually wired in mono. And the last thing you want is half of your bass power disappearing simply because of a trick effect. Doing this on a big powerful bass sound can actually make a vinyl cut go completely wrong and make the resulting vinyl jump. And this is where the general perception that bass instruments should be mixed in mono has come from. So I would always recommend restricting your use of extreme stereo effects like this on bass sounds to areas of your track like breakdowns, never for the main drops. Let me show you what I mean. I've just built a small breakdown section and I'm just going to copy the whole bass track with plugins applied using the duplicate function. I'll remove the stereo effect during the part with drums and leave it on for this breakdown. Let me play it back and you'll hear the difference between the two sections. As you can see, using the short delay in this manner can actually be a great arrangement tool to add some subtle differences between the sections of your production. Number 10, extreme tempo. And here I'm going to show you how to use a tempo curve and some tempo snapback functions to add some extremely dramatic crescendos into your track. And here we're using half a bar of our bass line over some standard drum repeats. It's chunky, right? But it's not actually doing very much. Now let me show you how to use a tempo rise to really push this to an extreme. Come down to the master channel and click on this triangular icon to bring up the master channel's parameters. If you don't already see the tempo parameters, click here and select mixer. Then come down to the box beneath and select tempo. These two numbers underneath are very important. They are the low point and the high point of the range of tempos that Ableton is actually displaying in the graph window. Our song is actually at 124 BPM, and the high range on this tempo graph is set to 124, which is why we have this red line right at the top of the envelope graph. I'm going to select a different tempo range. I want the top BPM to be 999, the maximum Ableton will allow, and the bottom to actually be the song's tempo, 124. This means that at any point I can always snap back to the song's original tempo just by drawing out a straight line on the bottom value of this tempo graph. By clicking on the red line, I'm now going to draw two automation nodes, one at the beginning of the tempo rise at the song's original tempo, and one here at 999 BPM where I want the rise to finish. Extreme tempo automation like this can often benefit from a curve. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, that will work on either a PC or a Mac, and click on our straight line and pull it down so it becomes a gentle curve. Now for the snapback. At bar 77, I want the tempo to instantly drop to the song's original 124 BPM. And to do that, I grab Ableton's pen tool up here on the top right and draw a flat line of tempo exactly at 124, the very lowest limit that it will allow me to do so. I can do it this accurately because I have the global quantize set to 1 bar, and the pen tool responds to how this parameter is set. So even in a very basic production like that, you can see how this kind of effect can have a big impact halfway through an arrangement. You can also use some of the different time stretch modes to your advantage. Let me show you what I mean. Let's use this type loop of atmosphere that we were using with the frequency shifter earlier on, and I'm going to use the duplicate function to copy it across our build-up region. Now I'm going to change the time stretch mode of all of these regions to repitch. Look at what happens. Let's hear that in the track. The power of this is fantastic, and I would encourage all of you who like the sound of this to play about with all of the different time stretch modes available in Ableton and see what you can come up with. So I hope you've enjoyed this F9 tips video. For more information, come and visit us at f9-audio.com or via our exclusive distribution partner, Loopmasters. There's plenty more videos on the F9 Audio blog, and if there's a subject you'd like to see us cover, please get in touch.